Told you earlier about the amazing collapse in the Labor vote in Western Australia in the latest poll. The Liberals at the last election were actually down to just 2 seats in the lower house. Now they are way ahead in the polls, and for one reason, well, there are a number of reasons, the resignation of the very popular Premier, but another reason seems to be its disastrous new Aboriginal heritage laws. Now, these laws came in this month, and they stop anyone with more than 1,100 square metres of land from doing any major new work on it without paying some local Aboriginal group to check if it will disturb any Aboriginal heritage. Costs, delays, and you know the rest. And already, indeed, some activists have used this, or actually misused this law, to say, well, look, you know, you can't plant these trees on this land, or demanding $2.5 million before they let volunteers plant their shrubs. Farmers are, of course, furious, and support, meanwhile, for the Voice in WA has also fallen through the floor. But it's not just opponents of the Voice that think this Aboriginal heritage protection law goes too far. And joining me is Greg McIntyre, Senior Counsel, who's a Voice supporter, who's worked with the Aboriginal Legal Service, has worked on the High Court Mabo case, established native title. Greg McIntyre, thank you very much for joining me. You say this law is unworkable. Why is that?
Well, it doesn't work for either Aboriginal people or small property owners. Because surprisingly, the government has decided to put into place these regulations which say that the 3-tier test, is to be sorted out by how deep the hole is, which somebody on their land chooses to dig. So if it's more than half a metre, then they have to do a due diligence assessment. And it's rather unclear as to how they would do that. As you say, the part of the legislation is to set up local Aboriginal cultural heritage services, but they largely don't exist. And the regulations come into place on the 1st of July. We now have 4 out of the 46 of those local bodies have been set up. If a farmer wanted to carry out a due diligence test, they need to ask somebody at least, and that mechanism is just not there. So I don't know who thought that was a good idea. I mean, if you dig a half a metre hole in what is an Aboriginal site, then you've probably damaged it significantly anyway. So I really don't know. That's a really good
point. That's an excellent point. So, so you probably get farmers trying to dig really shallow dams, like only half a metre, which would drown the site anyway. But a metre dam, well, you've got to call in someone at who knows what expense. How come anyone hasn't thought that through?
Well, I don't know who thought anything through in drafting those regulations. So, I mean, one would hope that they'll go back to the drawing board and have another go at it. But it's not the fault of any Aboriginal people or any farmers or others. Somebody, I mean, the legislation went through a 2 or 3 year consultation process. I mean, I looked at the legislation. The head legislation has some good points in it. It responds to the Juukan Gorge situation by allowing for variations if you find out new information. But when we only knew about these regulations in May for them to come into place in July, and when you look at them, they're just ridiculous. I mean, they don't bear any relationship to what might constitute damage to heritage, and they create some hurdles which farmers and others, property owners with more than a quarter acre block or 1,100 square metres will have to comply with. There are some suggestions if you go to their website as to what might not be affected if you're just doing like for like, if you're replacing fence posts with new fence posts. But it's a minefield which this government unfortunately has created.
Well, Greg McIntyre, you've just established one incredible. I hadn't thought of that, and you're quite right. And I don't know. The whole thing is, no one wants to destroy Aboriginal sites at all, I should imagine. No one of any sense. But it would have made sense to me, I think, first go and explore the region at government expense, find out where the sites are, and just work on that. Just put a little red flag on that, not do this way, the other way around. Greg McIntyre, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.